Can you make a premium chessboard on a CNC router using sheet materials? In this video we will make this modern chess set using Baltic birch plywood and a hobby level CNC router. And during the crafting process we will share insights in our design choices when developing the chessboard design. As the first step, we load a small sheet of 12mm plywood on the CNC router and start cutting the chessboard's main frame. At first we had the idea to have a foldable board that could store the chess pieces when folded. However, we ended up with a single piece game field concept. The parts we are cutting right now will be assembled into a frame that will hold the field tiles. And after popping out the frame parts, we could continue working on the remaining components. However, before loading more materials on the CNC router, we paint half of the remaining project materials white. After applying the paint to one of the sheet's surfaces, we add a screw in each of the workpiece corners. It allows us to flip the plywood without waiting for the paint to dry, speeding up the work. When all the white work surfaces were painted, we could paint the black ones. For the field tiles we will use 15mm sheets and 12mm plywood for the chess pieces. We want the game field to be a bit bulkier than the base and the chess pieces. Anyway, after the black sheets are finished and the white ones had dried, we started to cut the tiles for the game field. At first we cut the joint pockets and finished with the contour lines. To give the chessboard a unique look, we thought it would be cool to have a little gap between each tile, creating a dark edge between them, just like the door panels in our kitchen project. Once the white tiles were done cutting, we quickly removed them from the CNC work surface and loaded the 15mm black sheet on the CNC. While machine was cutting the black tiles, we could start preparing the chessboard's frame parts for finishing, so we quickly trimmed the edges of each frame component, checked how the CNC was cutting the tiles, and moved to the sanding operations. First starting with the orbital sander and the large surfaces. Once those were done, we could clamp the parts together and sand the edges. To finish sanding the frame parts, we had to sand the trimmed edges by hand. By the time we were done sanding, the CNC had finished its operations, and we could pop the tile components out of the workpiece. When the work surface is cleared, we can continue making the chess pieces. Honestly, designing them was the most challenging task of the project, since most high-end chessboards have these elegant wood-turned pieces which would be very challenging to replicate with a CNC router and a sheet material. After hours spent sketching and thinking of different ways to make the chess pieces, we decided to keep things as simple as possible and make them out of two components, the piece panel and the base panel. To make the chess pieces match the game field, we kept the same square shape for the panel and didn't exaggerate the rounded edges. When all the CNC operations had concluded, we could trim the edges of the black and white components. Considering the small size of the parts, we had to be very careful when doing the trimming operations, especially when working on the chess pieces. And after breaking multiple safety rules on the router table, we are ready to sand the small parts. To make the process more efficient, we clamped the game field tile parts together and sanded their edges with an orbital sander. Then we could rotate the parts by 90 degrees and sand the next edges. Again, the rounded corners required sanding by hand. When the chessboard tiles were completed, we sanded the chess pieces using the belt sander. This time we also sanded the painted surfaces, but also gives us this worn out vintage look. This would make your house guests assume you play a lot of chess and therefore have a giant brain. Once the small parts are sanded, it's time for finishing. We use a water-based lacquer and apply it with a simple paint roller. As the first task, we are finishing the chessboard frame parts. To speed up the finishing, we are applying the lacquer to all of the component edges simultaneously. Then we can spread the parts on our workbench and work on the larger surfaces. Once finished, we place the parts on the drying racks and continue with the chessboard tiles. The small size of the parts makes the finishing challenging. However, after a little bit of thinking, we realized the best approach might be to apply the finish to the edges of multiple tiles while holding them in hand and then spreading them out on an offcut piece to work on the top surfaces. And after the finishing, we could place them on the CNC router's work surface to dry. Since we couldn't hold more than 4 tiles while finishing, this process took some time. But once the tiles are done, we can apply the finish to the other side of the chessboard frame components. This time it went faster, since we only had to apply the finish to the larger surfaces. Once all the frame parts were placed back on the drying rack, we could work on the chess pieces. First we applied the lacquer to the base parts using the same approach we were using when working on the tiles, finishing the edges of multiple parts at the same time and placing them on an offcut piece on the workbench. and applying the finish to one of the larger surfaces. And while the bases of the chess pieces were drying, it was time to take the small paintbrush and apply the lacquer to the inside of each game piece. At first we thought it would take forever, however in 20 minutes or so we can continue with applying the finish to the outside edges of the chess piece components as well as the larger surfaces. While the chess pieces are drying, we can start assembling the chessboard. As the first step, we have to get the frame ready. So we are attaching the frame top components to the bottom part one by one. When all of them are in place, we can flip the assembly upside down and install the remaining parts. When making the frame components, we use the hidden dog bones, making them invisible after assembling the frame. It's important to hide all the tool markings when making high-end projects like this one. Anyway, after the frame was assembled, it was time to attach the tile components. At first we had planned to glue all the tiles in place, however most of them needed some convincing to install. So this time we are skipping the glue. Assembling is one of the most satisfying parts of any project, since you can see how the sketch on the computer comes to life and how all the little details turn out. After the chessboard was completed, it was time to assemble the chess pieces. So starting with the pawns, we hammered the chess pieces into the base parts. The chess pieces require hammering to assemble, so again we skip the glue. When the pawns are complete, we can continue with the rooks, the bishops, the queens, the kings and the knights. And soon we have the chess set ready. However, before considering the project as complete, we still have to make the box for the chess pieces. The box required the same steps as the rest of the chess set components. A little bit of CNC operations, trimming the edges, sanding, finishing and assembling. To make the chess box more interesting, we decided to have the chess pieces exposed yet protected. After placing the chess pieces on the box, you can leave it on the table or a shelf so you can see all the pieces, or flip the box upside down and prevent the dust from collecting on the chess pieces. Anyway, now the chess set is complete and it's time to take a look what we have accomplished. The main thing that the chessboard and all the chess pieces have in common is simplicity in terms of construction and shapes. The elevated game field gives the chessboard a unique look, and the simple chess pieces will help you concentrate on the game. The chess set is a great home decor. Although the large game field may be too big for a coffee table, it can be used as a wall decor. We hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.